Welcome. And look at this lovely Ulysse Nardin pocket watch from 1925. Back in the day, they used to win all of the timing competitions. And that's given me an idea. Why don't we regulate and tune this watch and put it up against a modern day Rolex SeaDweller? This one's an SD43 50th anniversary. So you've got 100 years of technology here. Should be interesting. It was back in 1887 when Ulysse Nardin first brought his chronometers to the Neuchâtel Observatory in Switzerland. And that inaugural event was won by them. And the most amazing thing, for the next 70 plus years, actually right through to 1960, they won every single event. Well, let's just check the timekeeping here on our pocket watch and see what our baseline is. Very low rate. The amplitude is quite low as well. And of course, the beat error here, we want that less than 1 millisecond. So we've got some work to do. And just for grins, we'll put the Rolex up as well. I do expect this to be much healthier. It was serviced relatively recently by Rolex, so no excuses. Oh yes, look at that rate. Now the Swiss certification COSC specification is +4 seconds to -6 seconds per day, and we're well within that. And no surprise, amplitude's around 220, which I think is pretty common for a Rolex, and 0 beat error. The Ulysse Nardin has got its work cut out, and we'll have to open it up and find out what's inside. Lovely silver case. We'll have a look at that one later. Just open this dust cover. And look at this beautiful gilt movement. Now to get this movement out, we'll need to remove the hands. I'm just going to set these up to 12 o'clock, and then we can remove the minute now hand together. I'll use a little plastic sheet here just to protect the dial. And look at the finishing on that dial. Isn't that pretty? And these blued steel hands. We'll have a look at those hands a bit later. I'm going to put them in this membrane box for now. And to get the movement out, we'll first need to remove this crown and stem. There's a small screw up there near the stem. And we don't take that out, it just needs to be loosened. Now we can get to the case screws. And we should be able to drop the movement out from the front. So I'll just give it a little push here. Yeah, and it comes out. Okay, we can take the dial out. These here just loosen up the copper feet that are on the dial. You can see that there. And should be able to just lift it away. And we'll work on the dial side first. I'm just removing the hour wheel and that dial washer. Oh, what's that doing there? That's one of those screws for the dial. Well, they must be loose fit. We'll have to make sure that we don't lose those. Now I'm spotting a problem here. Do you see this? That should be in that notch right there, that spring for our setting lever, and it's riding on top. I'm going to need to add that to the list. That's not correct. It's amazing just to see the finishing here on these parts, considering everything's under the dial. You know, you'd never see this unless you remove the dial itself. But that was the Swiss way of doing things. They like to finish their parts, and even their screws, the ends of them are polished. Okay, get into this part here, and this is the yoke. Now it's spring loaded, so I need to be careful. We don't want to be losing this part across the room, so I'm just going to loosen the screws. This one can come out. And the other side, I'll just lift that spring up first before we remove the actual yoke, which is this part here. And that's just to move, it's just used to move the clutch in and out between winding and setting the hands. Okay, I feel safe now. We can work on the spring. There's quite a bit of dirt in the watch here. I'm unsure about its service history. We'll have a look at the oils a little bit later and just make an assessment on that, but I'm already seeing some old grease. Well, this cannon pinion is friction fit and it's on the center wheel, and by removing that we can start to remove the parts on this side of the watch. First the balance. Probably the most delicate part, especially with the hairspring there. Now they've kindly given us a little notch we can put our screwdriver in to remove it. And I'll just rest it here on the balance tack because we'll take this apart a little bit later. I need to get the jewels separated on top and work on that. But before we go any further, I just want to make sure that we have no wind here. I can still feel this clicking backwards and forwards, the pallet fork. And so I'm using this Rodico here just to dampen the center wheel, because this is where things can go badly wrong. Removing the pallet fork bridge with wind on the watch, on the mainspring, can send parts flying. So fingers crossed here. We're going to be okay. Yep, I think we're good. Well, that part's a bit slippery, but we'll get the pallet fork out first, and then we'll have another go here with the pallet fork bridge. Let's just see if we did have some wind. I thought so. Alright, we can start to remove these bridges. And this will give us access to the train of wheels, the gear system. And again, there's a small notch here. I've got one at each side, and that's just helping me separate this from the main plate. Nice to see an extra jewel there in the center wheel. I don't think I can remove it though, not just yet. It's just coming underneath that main spring barrel bridge, so we'll need to remove it first. I'm just checking the lengths of these screws. They are different lengths, so this is important to remember when we put this back. I've been there before where if a screw is in the wrong slot or hole, it can poke through the other side and cause issues. So we can start to get our wheels out. I'll just need to remove these two cocks for the escape wheel and also the fourth wheel. We'll have a good look at those before they go through the cleaner. And this is the main spring barrel. We'll take that out as well and have a good look at it. And we're almost done here. I just got that one part to remove, which is the setting lever here, so we'll pull that out. And before the bridge plates and main plate go into the cleaner, I'm just going to have a look here through the jewels and see if we've got any damage. It does look as though we've got some oils, fresher oils on these jewels, which is interesting because I'm seeing old grease as well. So, in fact, this question came up from a subscriber recently, and it can cause issues if you add fresh oils to old grease. It just brings all the sediment up, and you end up creating a grinding paste. So, probably not best practice to do that. Let's continue on, and we'll get the train of wheels into our cleaner and load up our first basket. No particular order. And I've got this lovely vintage L&R cleaner here. And we'll get this into the ammonia-based cleaning solution first of all. And it's just going to swish and swash backwards for about 10 minutes. And then we've got 2 more rinsing solutions, cycles that it will go through before it then goes into the heater. Okay, so under that main spring barrel bridge we had the click. Again, I'm just being careful with the spring bar before we loosen everything off. And the crown wheel as well. Yeah, you can see again some of the older greases here. I'll just use my pegwood to break this up a little bit before it goes into the cleaner. Alright, let's work on this balance. I'll need to take the balance wheel and hairspring away here so that we can get to the jewels. And there's 2 jewels on this. I'm just looking at this. And I want to have a closer look at that. This is the balance staff, and while it looks okay, I'm not happy with the ends and the shapes of the pivots there. So we'll remove the hairspring, take a closer look at that, just zoom in a little bit. Do you see this? Especially the top one. It's kind of concaved out, and it's like a mushroom shape, and that should all be nice and parallel. So let's just check first of all the size of the pivot in the sides gauge. I've got that at a size 13. So I'm going to set up the J-cot lathe here, which will allow us to hand spin and hand turn these pivots a little bit. And we'll see if we can start to bring that down. I'll add some olive oil, cold pressed of course. And I'm just using a burnishing bar here to take that edge off to the lantern on the J-cot, and that's just like a disc with holes in it. So this is in a number 12, and it helps protect the part of the pivot there that I don't want to have the burnisher touch. I'll just finish off with this, and I'm going to round the end of the pivot here, not conical, but just a slight rounding on this edge using the burnishing bar. That's much better. And we'll get the other side done as well. It didn't need as much work, but we might as well have both pivot ends nicely cleaned up. Look at that. That's much nicer. Well, let's just try this in the sides gauge and run it down the jewel sizes and see where it had ended up. Yeah, it doesn't fit in an 11, but it does in a 12, no surprise. So one size down, or about 0.01 of a millimeter. So time to do some poising. I'm looking for where the weight is on the balance, and we'll make an adjustment here with the weight opposite the impulse jewel. I need to reduce that a little bit with these undercutters. Just got to find the right size for the screw here. Now this one will work. So I'm just taking off a little bit of the brass underneath. And I've worked on both sides here. And I'll also check to make sure that it's round and level. So I'm just using the air gap here to check that over. And time to look at our mainspring. And I go a little bit backwards and forwards on these old springs. This is an original blued steel spring. And I know some folks just change them out as a matter of course, but I think if it's in good condition, I prefer to keep these in place. We'll just check that once it comes out of the barrel. To be very careful here. These can spring out quite wildly if you're not keeping them under control. This one looks quite good, so we'll get that cleaned up. As part of the balance here, I need to separate these jewels. And we're seeing the whole jewel here, which is where that pivot goes through, and then there's a cap on top, which is this part. Yeah, that's all dried up oil. So we'll get that off into the cleaner. And we'll also do the other side, which is the jewel here on the base plate. Yeah, there's a little bit of dirt under here. Is that a crack in our jewel? Oh, phew, it's just a hair. You can see this old grime and dirt underneath here. These haven't been separated in a long time. So we'll also use some pegwood here just to clean out the holes a little bit. And now it's come back from the cleaner, I can add some fresh new oil. A little bit of a delicate operation to get these tiny screws back in. These are about the smallest on the watch movement. And also here for the base plate. So before we put this balance back together completely, I just want to check the operation of the wheel. Since we've made quite a few adjustments to it, I'm going to put that back into the watch movement and just check that we have good end shake and side shake and that everything's spinning freely here. So we'll just use the air blower to check that. That's looking pretty good. And we'll check this end shake and side shake. Yeah, that's probably a little more than I would have preferred. And that's probably as a result of just taking that balance staff down a size. So I think if we had more time, perhaps we would do more work on that. But we should be okay. So we'll start putting this back together. First the regulator, and I'll just set this to the neutral position, and our hairspring. And I'm remembering now where this was. It's important to get it back very close. It doesn't have to be precise at this point because we'll use that slot there in the collar just to adjust it to eliminate any beat error later on. And make sure that we've removed any final dust or oil or grease. And this is ready to go back into our watch. Just one last thing, which is to make sure the hairspring sits between the two regulator pins. So I've got the mainspring all cleaned up. I put a very light coating of oil onto it. And we'll use this mainspring winder here to compress it and get it back into the barrel. That's one of those pleasurable moments in watchmaking, returning the mainspring, especially if it all goes well. It's no fun if it doesn't go well. I'm just going to finish off with a light smear of D5 oil. And that's ready to go back as well. So we'll start the rebuild of the main plate here. And the first thing I want to do is put the setting lever back. Once the bridge plates are in, we can't get access to that. So important to get it in first. And I'm just going to check these wheels. They came out of the cleaner pretty nice, didn't they? Look at that. I'm quite happy with these. I don't see any damage to the gears, and the pivots all look good. We'll get that ratchet wheel fitted as well. Just clear away any small specks of dust, and we'll put back our train of wheels. And the easier part is getting these into the bottom jewels on the plate. The more challenging process is fitting our bridge plates and cocks with the jewels on them, because we've got to get this lined up very precisely. If we don't have the pivots coming through those jewels accurately and we start to screw this down, then there's a good chance we'll crack or break a jewel and even the pivot itself. So just going along very carefully here. So these are not fully screwed down just yet. And checking these pivot ends. A slight adjustment on this one here. There it is, clicked into place. You can usually hear or feel them go, and then just check to make sure that the gears are spinning freely, and we can start to tighten it down. So I'll work on the main bridge here, which had the crown wheel, and all this has to be fitted because it hangs from underside of the bridge. And this crown wheel here is engaged as part of the winding mechanism. And onto the click spring. That reminds me of a creator down under, click spring. And he does some amazing work, a watchmaker, and his micro-engineering on his lathe and precision and photography is amazing. So If you haven't seen that, recommend it. Click spring. And this is what makes our click sound when we wind the watch up. So we'll get this screwed down before we try to set the spring itself. Not all of the way, but most of the way down. Okay, our clicker is ready. So we can put the mainspring barrel bridge back in place. I need to remember here that we had those screws at different lengths, so I want to make sure that we get them into the right holes. I've been here before that if you get one of these wrong and find something is not operating correctly, check the other side of your plate to make sure you don't have any screws sticking through and interfering with some of the operations. And center wheel bridge and third wheel. So I've got to get both of these jewels over the top of those two gears. It's nice to see a center jewel. Many movements don't have that. That just provides more accuracy and consistency in the operation to have that jeweled. So I've turned the watch plate over and we're going to work on the dial side here, getting the clutch in place. And because I want to test this operation, I'm going to put the crown stem back temporarily. And this has a squared end to it, so I just need to rotate that to get it to go in correctly. And we'll screw it down in place. And our yoke operates on the sides of this sliding clutch. So I'll just do the side walls for the grease. And this is that heavier blue grease I'm using. Let's click that into place. Oh, need to get rid of that hair though. And this is one of our return springs. And the other one I need to look at because when we dismantled the watch, that was riding over the top of the heart there and didn't look right at all. So we'll just set this spring after adding a bit more grease. And check that's okay. All right, and our train of wheels is operating correctly as well. So we'll keep going. We'll get these intermediate wheels in. And these work their way up to the minute wheel and hour wheel so that we can set the time on our watch. And I need to be careful of this minute wheel when we put the cannon pinion back. It's a really tight fit. I don't want to crush that. Some people advise putting the minute wheel in after the cannon pinion, which makes sense. There we go. So let's check this spring that was causing a problem earlier, just riding up on that plate there before. We'll get it screwed down properly and set the spring. And I'll just pull the crown in and out and just make sure that that's staying flat. Just goes into that notch there. Oh no. Did you see that? It's just riding up onto the top of the setting lever. We'll need to take this out and have a closer look at it. Something's not right. I'll take the setting lever out as well, and we'll get that under the microscope and have a closer look. Yeah, do you see here the chamfered edge is all rounded off, and I think the spring is just riding up on that because of the shape. So we'll get that filed down a little bit there. Let's see if we can sharpen up these edges. That's better. And I'll also do that to the spring as well. I'll just use my Arkansas stone here just to tidy that up. And of course we'll need to finish that, polish it with a burnisher, make it look pretty, very Swiss. Aha, that's it, much better. Okay, that's behaving correctly now. So we can move on. We'll get the palette fork in. Now we can put some wind onto the watch. The palette fork will hold the escape wheel until we just click it backwards and forwards here, and we're looking for a really clean click. I'll add some jewel grease onto this exit stone and just move this backwards and forwards here, and that's going to load jewel grease onto the escape wheel. We'll do that 3 or 4 times to get all the way around, and now for the big moment. Will it come alive again? No, it seems as though it wants to work here for some reason. Let me just carefully tighten this down. Underneath the balance is this screw here. I think I'm going to take that down a little bit because it's sticking up. I don't know that this is the issue. Of course, we'll polish the ends. Well, that's sunken down now, so we'll try this again. That's still not working. Okay. We'll need to remove the hairspring and put this balance wheel back in. I just want to check again that this is working okay. Oh, I can see the problem here. Look, it's colliding with the bridge, the palette fork bridge, and there's the problem. We haven't set that down correctly. You see it's way up high, so let's get this screwed down correctly. That was a silly mistake. Good. You see how the impulse jewel catches the palette fork there. So we'll put the hairspring back in, rebuild our balance, and have another go. Fingers crossed this time we can get this lovely watch working again. There it is. Yes? Yes. Excellent. So I just want to make sure we demagnetize the movement before making any adjustments. And I'm also going to oil up the jewels. I'm going to leave the pallet fork though, so we won't add jewel to that, and we'll add a slightly heavier oil to the center wheel. And we'll do the same on the other side. Skip the pallet fork. And the other thing I noticed is to make sure we don't have any variance in bead error, I want to tighten up this collar a little bit on this hairspring, so I decided to take that off the wheel. I also check that it's centered correctly in our jewel and put the balance back together one more time, and let's test it. Okay, very fast. I know that we haven't set our lift angle here, so we'll do that next. I don't always do this, but we're getting serious about our competition, so I want to make sure that we get that correct. And I'm looking to see if we can align these orange marks such that we get 180 degrees of amplitude here. So I'm just winding up our movement one notch at a time. I'll slow this down for you so you can see it. So I'm trying to get that orange mark into the same window. That's it right there. And I'll back down our lift angle until our time grapher here shows 180 degrees, because we know that's what the watch is operating at. A little bit more. Oh, we're very close here. I've got that at 39 degrees lift angle. So we can wind up our watch and see where we are at. So it's still about 500 seconds a day fast. So for that amount of adjustment, we are going to need some timing washers. The timing screws that are on this balance aren't enough to take that amount. So we have a number 19 Swiss or 16 American. And these are our 4-minute washers. We should slow down with a pair, but I'll grab 4 and set them aside. I don't need that many. And we'll put this in place on the balance wheel in pairs opposite each other. Even for the larger washers, they're still very tiny and tricky. How's that looking? Okay, well, big improvement, still 100 seconds fast, so we'll add another 1-minute pair here, and that should hopefully get us fairly close. All right, 19 seconds a day, 20 seconds a day. We'll just get our lift angle set correctly. It shouldn't have changed the timing very much, but it will give us a more accurate reading on the amplitude. Okay, that's getting pretty close. So for this adjustment, I'm just going to separate our regulating pins just slightly, which has an effect of lengthening the hairspring and so slowing it down. And lastly, for 6 seconds, I'm going to use the regulator, my chronometer, and just spin those regulator pins away from the hairspring a little bit. And again, that has the same effect of slowing it down. How's that? It's getting very close here. Now I know this is just one position, dial down position this is called. I was looking closely at that balance wheel. I did catch something. My eye caught this issue with the top jewel for the balance, and we've found this hair here. I'm glad I found that. So we'll get that taken care of. It's time to put our dial back. Just need to place the hour wheel back in and the dial washer, and then line up our copper feet. And they get locked in by these half screws here. They kind of cut into the copper. I think that may have actually picked up a little bit of the copper as well. I want to make sure that we remove that. Don't want that floating around the movement. Yeah, just there. Okay. So in order to put the movement back into the case, we'll need to remove the crown and stem. And it'd be nice to clean this up a little bit. So I'm going to use a very light flitz polish on this silver. I did notice looking at this that we have some markings as well. It's 900 or 90% silver. And these are German hallmarks, the crown and moon. And look at this date here, 11/8/1941. At least that's the last marking for a service. And let's take a look at the crystal as well. I see some scratches. This is an acrylic, so we can get those taken out with this Poly Watch product here. How about that? So I want to remount this into the bezel, and we can do that by compressing the crystal. And then I'll drop the bezel down on top, and that just sort of clicks in place, and we can unscrew it. And when the acrylic relaxes, it snaps into the bezel. So there's a small pin here in the side of the movement that just helps us align it into the case. I think I've got it there, yeah. And I'll loosely fit the crystal just to hold the movement while we secure it on the back. We'll need to put the case screws back in place. And I'm using the crown stem here to make sure it's perfectly aligned before we lock it down. And I can actually see the indentations here in the case as well, so that gives us a clue that we have good alignment. And also that the case is likely original. Look at this. It's looking lovely, isn't it? We just need to add the hands back. And the trick here is to make sure that we have them set at the right height such that they clear each other. The seconds hand is actually going to sit in the subdial, the sunken subdial there, and operate underneath the hour hand and the minute hand. So we'll get that pushed down. Thank you for joining me on that. Hopefully you've stayed with me to enjoy the final result. Or is it part 2, the Watch Odyssey competition? against that Rolex SeaDweller. What do we think? Here's the observatory, and welcome to Watch Odyssey Observatory Competition 2024. As you tell, ran their test for 45 days. Well, we don't have time for that. They use many positions and temperatures. We'll use 2 positions and 3 temperatures and take the averages. So without further ado, let's put up the Ulysse Nardin first. Dial up. Excellent start. And we're just going to look at the rates. And we'll take the average over 4 samples from our time grapher. And that's at plus 0.5 seconds per day. So there'll be quite a few numbers here. Hopefully you'll enjoy the competition. If you're not a numbers person, feel free to skip forward. Plus 2 seconds, which is also a great result for the Rolex. We'll switch that to dial down. And I've got plus 3 seconds here, and we'll average that. So for the Rolex, we're at plus 2.5 seconds per day. And time for the Nardin, well, not quite so good. Dial down. This is showing, around 7 seconds, I think. I've got that averaging out. So this one would be 3.75. The Rolex has it for round 1, the room temperature test. Time to go cold. My wife's lemonade says we're at 3.8 degrees Celsius in the refrigerator. Let's have these 2 bake in here for about an hour. And we'll rerun that test. I'm going to start with the Rolex this time. Oh, it's lost a little bit, hasn't it? Look at this. So these samples here giving us, what's that, an average of minus 5.5 seconds in the dial-up position. And dial down, well, that's surprising actually. Look at this beat error, that's pretty unusual, and also the amplitude is down for the Rolex. I wonder if we have an issue here, but we're going to use the numbers. All's fair. So that is averaging out at minus 7.75 seconds per day. And no surprise, the Nardin slowed down as well, those cold temperatures. Yeah, fairly even sample rate there of minus 10. So we'll switch that on its back and do the dial down position. Actually much better. Although in truth, you're really looking for a low variance between these positions. So that one, dial down, actually averaged out at minus 1. So we are at minus 5.5. Excellent. A win for the Nardin on the cold temperature. This is getting interesting. Well, the oven is too hot, way too hot for the next test. So we'll borrow the sauna here, get this down to 100 Fahrenheit, which is equivalent to 30 degrees Celsius. I'll just check that our soup is up to temperature, 30 degrees, and we'll leave them in the sauna to enjoy that for a few minutes, well, about an hour. So first of all, the Rolex is up. It seems to like the sauna. Excellent performance there. So I've got that as 0.25 of a second. And here with the dial down, .5. So our average here is going to be tough for the Nardin to beat. Just over 3 seconds per day. But what a great start. Look at this. Nardin dial up. 4th reading, +1, excellent. Okay, so that's a great start. And we have a competition on our hands here. Let's go dial down. Last test. Oh no! What happened? The Nardin lost it at the line here. Look at this. The rate has increased quite a bit. So the dial down average there that I saw was plus 10.75 average. So let's calculate this. Yeah, just around 5.5 seconds, just over. So the Rolex got it at the line. Well, let's add up all these numbers, and I'll just do a straight addition. I'm sure there are different mathematical ways of doing this to get the results, but this is all for fun. So I added this up at 3.875 seconds per day, and that was positive. And then the Rolex, well, these numbers actually played very well for the Rolex. I'm at less than a second per day, so the Rolex has it. Well done. Well, the competition was close, and I hope you enjoyed that, and you enjoyed the journey in restoration with this beautiful Ulysse Nardin pocket watch from 1925. With that, I'm just going to leave you to enjoy it until next time.